Welcome to this month's episode of Finding Perfect Property, where we explore the world of real estate and the intricacies of making a home in the UK. I'm your host, Camilla Dell, Managing Partner of Black Brick, and today I'm joined by Nick Rollason, a specialist in UK immigration law and partner at Kingsley Napley. Nick has extensive experience in advising high net worth individuals and families on UK immigration matters and is regularly consulted by the UK immigration authorities on proposed changes to UK immigration rules and policy. And he is here today to share his insights and expertise on the changing landscape of UK immigration. So, Nick, welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Camilla.
Nick, I always love to sort of start by asking my guests how they ended up in the careers that they ended up in. Immigration is obviously a really niche area. Tell me how your career evolved and how you ended up becoming an immigration lawyer.
Yeah, well, I became a lawyer because I was interested in constitutional law. I was interested in really fighting the government. And immigration law is one of those areas where you can fight the government quite regularly. And, you know, where we need to, we do. So I went to a firm that did immigration. There weren't many at the time that did immigration as a specialisation. And I found a great person called Elspeth Gyle, who's one of the innovators and the founders of sort of real early specialists in immigration, and started working with her, and I never looked back.
Fantastic. You say you wanted to fight the government. Would you say that that immigration is it about fighting? You would have thought that we want people to come here and spend their money. Why are we having to fight with government?
Well, I have to say that in my youth, in my idealistic days, I used to do a lot of asylum work and used to do a lot of that sort of human rights work. And as my career has progressed, I've moved away from that in much more into looking after individuals, wealthy individuals, businesses. And so the fighting aspects sort of disappeared over time, and it's more moved into cooperation with the government and working on what works best. So working to find a good solution on the policy side that makes sense.
Asylum work, that must have been absolutely fascinating.
It was the old days when you could call up the Home Office and have a chat with the person dealing with your client's case, and they would know exactly what was going on, who your client was. Yeah. And I can't tell you how different it is now. It's so far removed. I'm
sure. Thank you for sharing your story, Nick. It's always fascinating to sort of hear about how people ended up in the careers they did. I want to move on to Kingsley Napley and your role within the firm. Can you explain to our audience today what it is that you actually do at Kingsley Napley?
Okay, yeah. So I'm the head of the immigration team at Kingsley Napley. We're about 40 people in that team, and we deal with both corporate and private client immigration. And we sit within a wider firm, a full service firm that deals with everything from company commercial, private client, family, real estate, all the kind of things you'd expect from a full service firm. So I run the team, and I have 5 partners who all work with me and run various bits of the sort of specialist offerings that we have for either corporate clients or for private clients.
Fantastic. That's a big team. So 40 of you just purely looking at immigration.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's a big part of the business.
Yeah, and great people and great fun.
Let's talk a little bit about the industry and how it's changed. I want to start by looking back to 2008 when the UK government first launched the famous Tier 1 investor visa. Can you explain to our listeners what was that visa, who was it for, and why was it introduced?
Yeah, so the investor visa is a sort of it's the inheritance of a previous visa, which was there since 1994, and then it was rolled into the Tier 1 scheme. So it's actually been around for much longer than that. And it was always a visa that allowed people with £1 million to come to the UK if they invested in UK equities, UK corporate bonds, or UK government bonds. And when it was launched initially, and beyond 2008, you could also invest in part of that in property. So about 25% you could put into property as long as you were living in it. So it was quite an interesting offer from the government. Yeah. And it was always a small category. There weren't that many people, but it was a very useful category particularly for people who weren't working in the UK, didn't want to run a business in the UK, were retiring to the UK. A really very, very useful category for a small group of people where you could say, look, there's a very simple solution if you have the funds.
And so that was £1 million, and you could come to the UK, invest a little bit of it in real estate, a little bit of it in other things, and then you could just be here indefinitely?
Yeah, so you could once you'd built up 5 years residence, you can get permanent residence as long as you maintain your investment. The rules changed a little bit over time, and in 2014 it went up to 2 million. There was a big change there, a big rush of people trying to get in under the wire before it went up to 2 million. But it was a very clear visa category where you would set up a wealth management account in the UK, bring in your funds or have the funds available, get your visa, make the investments, maintain the investments. Clients work with wealth managers to make sure they were invested properly into the correct UK assets. And as long as you met those requirements and actually after 2014 you spent enough time in the UK, then you would qualify for permanent residence, which is called indefinite leave. So it was a really clear category for people to be able to come, live here and bring their families and put the kids in school.
And who came in on those visas? How many have you got? Can you give us a sense of what nationalities were taking up that visa and the sorts of numbers of people that came over on that tier 1 investor visa since 2008?
Yeah, so the numbers were always relatively small, in the couple of hundreds a year. It was never a big visa category until this change, when it went from 1 to 2 million, when there was a bit of a rush of people coming in. But generally it was anywhere between 200 and 400 visas a year, depending on the particular year. The main nationalities who were using the visa were often Chinese. They were often number 1, Russians number 2, and then a whole mishmash of other nationalities: US, Brazilians, Indians, all sorts of different nationalities. But China and Russia dominated in terms of the numbers. And they were, typically families who wanted to move here for lifestyle choices, kids in school, find a stable and secure place that was politically stable, and had a good sort of economic infrastructure around it. So those were the sort of typical families, and it was never a huge number.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it from those numbers. Fast forward to 2022, and we now know that the investor visa programme was scrapped in February 2022 amid security concerns. How has this impacted UK immigration?
So it's been a pretty big change. The visa was closed with 4 hours notice, and we had a number of clients who were planning to come in on that visa later that year, had places for their children in school. Wow. And these are a lot of people from Singapore, from Hong Kong, from the US as well. And they were simply not able to do that. We found some other solutions for them that worked for some of them and not all of them. So it was a big change. And what the closures meant is that there is now no obvious route for people coming to the UK who are high net worth individuals, families, to move here without needing to work or run a business or be doing something actively in the UK.
Do you think it was an overreaction by the UK government? I mean, what security concerns did they legitimately have? Was it linked to the war between Russia and the Ukraine? I mean, it doesn't sound like there were that many people coming over on this investor visa category in the first place.
Yeah, I don't think it's not so much about the numbers. It's more about the perception, I think. So in 2018, when we had the whole Skripal scandal, the Salisbury poisoning, the government undertook to do a review. That was Theresa May's government. That took a very long time, but it was really principally focusing on Russian influence. And I think that focus on Russia and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the two came together, and the reaction was pretty strong. The government said that they had looked into a lot of cases, 6,000 something cases, for people who applied between 2008 and 2015, when the rules were tightened up actually, and found what they said was a minority of people where there might be security, concerns about how the wealth had been acquired, concerns about whether it was acquired through crime. We don't know what they mean by minority. We don't know how many cases that means, but we do know that some of those were to do with Russian oligarchs who had used the visa. So there was a direct link to the Russian thing. I do think personally that it's a slight overreaction, that it's a political reaction rather than a genuine security concern. And the other thing as well to point out is that they did identify that there were a number of wealth managers who were slightly weak in doing the AML, the anti-money laundering checks on these clients. And that was a sort of almost like a chink in the wall that people were able to come through. So it was a weakness in the system there. And that's because the government outsourced, the Home Office outsourced all the anti-money laundering stuff to wealth managers. They didn't do it themselves, but they asked FCA-regulated wealth managers to do that. So obviously when you get a few rotten apples that are policing the system, then the system doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it seems a shame that a whole programme was shut down because of a few people. A better solution surely is to have better checks, and so the people that are legitimate security risk are just not let in, and people that are legitimately wanting to come over here and invest here and use all our great schools and education system and set businesses up here are still allowed to come in. It seems like we've shot ourselves in the foot a little bit with the shutting down of the scheme so suddenly. At the time of shutting down the investor visa, the UK government said it had failed to deliver for the UK people and gave opportunities for corrupt elites to access the UK. Do you think their comments are justified?
Well, they tried to justify it by saying that 10 named sanctioned oligarchs had benefited from the scheme over the many years that the scheme had run. That's the real basis of saying that. In terms of whether the scheme had delivered for the British people, which is really the economic benefit of the scheme, we had been trying for many years through our exchanges with the Home Office, through the Migration Advisory Committee and directly with the Home Office, to say you need to change this scheme so that it does have more economic benefit through different ways of investing. But unfortunately, the government wasn't really in listening mode. The Home Office wasn't listening to those proposals, and therefore the whole idea about the economic benefit really never went anywhere. And it was seen very much as a passive investment with little economic benefit other than the spending that the families would do in the UK, which could be significant, but never really a great driver for the economy.
We've heard a lot about oligarchs who use the visa route and are on the sanctions list. You've mentioned that. Are there any good news, positive examples of people who used the investor visa and did good and actually benefited the UK?
Well, I can only speak anecdotally from our clients, and we've had lots of clients who've done some great things. They've set up great businesses that have employed lots of people, and some of them have created some really interesting technologies here as well. We've had clients who've gone into various parts of the UK to sort of regenerate bits of, I'm thinking about the Highlands particularly, lots of investment up there for one of our clients. And of course, many of our clients are ultra high net worth, so they are making philanthropic investments wherever they are, and often they will do that where they are. So we've seen those sorts of investments, and we've worked with clients making those types of donations as well in the UK. So, it's difficult to say that everybody does that, because some people are just here living, putting their kids through school and just being here, maintaining their investments. But others do a lot more. So it's difficult to generalise, but we've seen lots who've done some really great things.
That's good. It's good to have positive stories. I feel sometimes as a society we like to focus on the doom and gloom and less about the success stories. So it's it's good to hear that there were people that came over on the investor visa and actually did some good. So the investor visa route, that's over, that's finished. What options do wealthy individuals have now if they want to move to the UK?
Well, right now it's pretty limited. So we have, like most developed economies, we have the usual routes for people to come in through work, through business, and through what we would probably call talent. So people who are famous or leaders in their fields can come in through talent. But those obviously all require people to be working or running businesses. So there are lots of options if you're going to be doing that. And a lot of our clients do work. A lot of our clients do want to run businesses and set them up. So those remain options through the skilled worker visa, through the innovator visa. And some of our clients actually, either they or their spouses are talented in one way or another. So you can still come under those routes. But the actual options are relatively limited. So typically where we'd be speaking to a family before, we would say, use the investor visa. Now we would say, well, maybe set up a family office type structure which might employ you as long as you're actively involved in the running of that family office, which often our clients are. So there are some options. They're just a little bit more complicated to explain to clients and a little bit more complicated to set up as well, because we have to do corporate setups and other things like that. So there are options, but they are different options.
And as a result of the investor visa program shutting down, have you seen a drop-off in the numbers coming over to the UK?
Well, if you look at the overall numbers, the UK has seen huge immigration numbers coming in over the last year. So you might have seen the net migration numbers about people coming to work here. Those numbers have gone through the roof, really, and they're very high. And that's a number of things. It's the sort of bottleneck being released after COVID. It's businesses coming back. That's obviously slowing down because of the recession. But on the high net worth client side, yes, we have seen a slowdown. And it's partially because actually setting up the structures for them to then come in and potentially be sponsored or come and run a business does take a bit longer. So we are seeing still some interest and demand, but there's no obvious solution. You can say, don't worry, here's the solution, in you come.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit more complex and technical.
Do you think that the wealthy are now sort of turning their backs to the UK and looking elsewhere?
I wouldn't say absolutely. I mean, there has been a lot of movement around the world. People are going to other destinations. There are other options that are more attractive if you're a wealthy family and you want somewhere nice to live and put your kids through school. So people are looking at those. And if there is a simple sort of investor type visa, people might select that because it's simple. It's just simple. And they don't have to potentially show they're working or running a business. So what you tend to find is that people who want simple solutions are going to jurisdictions where there are simple solutions.
What about EU citizens who were living in the UK? Obviously, we've now had Brexit. So in a post-Brexit UK, what options do EU citizens have to remain living here?
So anybody who was here before the end of the transitional period can stay here. So there are lots of EU nationals, 6 million of them, who got their status, either what's called pre-settled status, which is a sort of temporary status, or settled status, which is permanent residence. So there's lots of EU nationals who stayed here. The interesting thing is there's also a lot of EU nationals who are floating around the world who used to work, in the city, in the financial services industry, who've left and gone elsewhere, have gone to the US, have moved elsewhere, who actually, because they lived here for 5 years historically, could get an EU settled status, and they don't know that. So if anybody's listening to this show and is an EU citizen who is outside the UK and lived here for 5 years, they can actually still apply under the EU settlement scheme to get their settled status, and if they want to, maintain that and keep that and come back to the UK if they wanted to.
Well, that's good news.
But,
I think there was a lot of fear post Brexit that EU citizens would up sticks and leave, and the city would lose lots and lots of people. In reality, I'm not sure that's happened. Would you?
It's happened to some extent, but not the extent to which it was predicted. So yeah, EU citizens have left. If you're an EU citizen who wants to come in now, you're just like anybody else. You need a work permit, you need to get a skilled worker visa. So, you've got some barriers if you want to come in, but...
unless you were here before.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Good tip. Which country, if you sort of had to look at a map, globally, look at the world, you're a wealthy individual and you've got the whole world to choose from, which country do you think now is seen as the most friendly towards accepting wealthy individuals?
Yeah, so
Maybe give me your top three.
yeah,
It's hard to choose one, isn't it?
It's hard to choose one. I mean, it's always dependent on what the family wants, what they want usually for their children's education, what sort of system they're looking at. But if we're talking about popular destinations, at the moment, the UAE, I'd say, is very hot as a destination. It has an investor visa. There's a lot of people going there. Quite a few of them are Russians who don't want to be in Western Europe for obvious reasons. But there's lots of other nationalities, Indians and Chinese and other people going to the UAE using this visa. The other ones, I would say, the US is always popular. It has a visa, an EB5 visa, which is used, which is.
But isn't the US the worst place to have a passport in terms of tax?
It is, but you can maintain residence there, never get a green card or a passport. So, again, tax is a big driver. And then there's the usual suspects. Australia remains popular with people in the APAC region and in Asia. But there's other jurisdictions that still remain popular. Switzerland is one of them. Israel is another one of them.
Portugal seemed to be quite popular at one point.
And Portugal. Yeah. I'd say Portugal is probably on the list is about sixth, but I'm talking to lots and lots of people, and all they're talking about is getting a golden visa in Portugal.
Interesting.
And it's a great place to be. It's a lovely, lovely country to be in. But we're finding people getting residence there just as a sort of back pocket residence that they can use. And actually, if you spend 5 years there, if you can speak Portuguese, it's actually quite easy to get Portuguese citizenship.
Challenge. Therein lies the challenge, to learn the local language.
But we've had lots of Russian clients and Chinese clients who we've referred on to Portugal who've actually managed to get through that. So I was quite surprised to hear that, but it's doable.
Yeah, interesting. I want to come back to the UK and how you see the immigration landscape moving in future. Obviously, we've discussed Tier 1 investor visa route and how that came about and why it no longer exists. The landscape to me seems very political. At the same time, the UK is desperate for investment in a post-Brexit world. We want people to come and live here, work here, set up their businesses here. Do you have any insights into what might happen next? Will there be another version of Tier 1 investor visa route that comes along to try and encourage more people to come to the UK and invest here?
Well, the Home Office is looking at a replacement. They've come up with some draft proposal for something called an innovator business angel visa. And in its current form, although it's not really official, it's not really out there, but in its current form, what we know is that it's a £5 million investment and that it's really focused on innovative businesses, so investment into UK innovative businesses, which should really be tech businesses.
Right.
And also, it wants to attract people who already have a track record of having either made money by founding their own business or be a professional investor in technology or innovative businesses. So that's the real difference, is that it's very much about people who are business people who are going to be actively investing and looking at opportunities in the UK. There are some challenges about the proposal, what the Home Office are talking about at the moment, which we'll hopefully be talking to them about, but we're not expecting this route to have much take-up because
it's quite limited.
It's limited, and if you want to invest in private equity or venture capital into, or even angel investment into companies in the UK, you could come over and set up your own company or run a company here that would do the same. And so there's lots of ways that people might just not choose to go down that route and commit £5 million to illiquid investments.
Yeah. Sounds like it needs more thought if it's going to take off in any meaningful way. What advice would you give to someone considering moving to the UK for work or to study or to live? What sorts of things would they need to think about now in order to be able to come here?
Tax, the first one, always. So we always get our clients to go and speak to our private client international tax advisors in the firm, because that can make or break a decision to move. We also think about, well, what are the options for permanent residence? Are you going to be on track for getting permanent residence? Is that what you need? So we do a lot around planning for what people actually want. Do they want a British passport at the end of it all? and that sort of informs what visa they would go, what visa route they would go down. But I think the key things are really looking at tax. Can you bring your family? Can you stay and work here? Those are the kind of key things.
How far do clients have to plan ahead if they want to move here? How long does the process typically take?
I think it depends on whether you've got children. If you have children, you'll probably be looking way ahead, because getting places at schools secured, you're looking at least a year ahead, if not more.
Yeah.
If you don't have children and you're looking at a process, you probably need to be thinking about at least 6 months. It's not that's how long the visa takes, because once everything's in place, we can get the visa typically very quickly, within a few weeks from when it's filed. But the actual planning and putting in place the structures to help people come in and do whatever they want to do will take some time.
And from an education perspective, there's no real restrictions. If I'm a wealthy individual and I want to send my child to go to boarding school here or university here, is that still a relatively straightforward process, or has it become harder to do that now as well?
No, it's still pretty easy. We still have a parent of a child at school visa, which allows one parent to come over and look after children up to the age of 12. So there's lots of things to help that.
And then after 12, they're on their own.
It's a bit of a problem, that, actually, because that is a bit of an issue. So and that's where the investor visa would often come in. So a family would move here, they'd be able to be here while the kids were in school here, but that's a bit of a challenge beyond the age of 12. So again, that might be something that the Home Office should look at if they want to make sure they get lots of foreign students coming in.
And we've talked about what clients need to think about. In your career, you've probably worked on lots and lots of cases. What are the biggest mistakes that you've seen individuals fall into over the years?
I come back to my previous response:
tax.
Always tax.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of clients who've come in who are not that sophisticated and who don't want to take advice, and who come in and ignore the advice, and then face all sorts of issues around bringing in chargeable income into the UK. So, we had a client who came in with an investor visa, didn't want to take any tax advice, or at least told them they were getting tax advice somewhere else, and brought in a significant amount of money to buy a house for about £5 million. And we had to reverse that, because a lot of it actually would have fallen as a taxable remittance under the remittance rules. So we had to reverse that quite quickly and think of other ways to actually fund the purchase.
You must have worked on lots and lots of cases during your 25 plus year career. Have you got a favourite case, or the most memorable or the most rewarding case that you've ever worked on in your career?
It's a difficult one, because I've had some really fun cases, but I do remember at the beginning of my career, and we used to specialise a lot in EU law, so EU free movement law, which now, having been an EU free movement lawyer for many years, I am no longer after Brexit. But we had a great American client who was a shaman and was coming over to run shamanic workshops in the UK, and was stopped at the airport, and asked what he was doing. And he's saying, well, I'm coming to run some workshops and I'm being paid for it. And they said, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. But as it turns out, he was an American living in the Netherlands who ran his own business in the Netherlands. And because of EU free movement law, which, as you know, is no more, he was allowed as a third country national, a US citizen, to use these rules to come in and provide services under the EU treaty. So I sent a fax to immigration and I threatened to sue them, and they let him in, and it was great. It was a real victory, because it was quite a sort of test case almost.
Wow.
And the client sent me some beautiful owl feathers to thank me for my hard work in getting him into the country.
And for those of our listeners that don't understand what a shaman is, just explain.
It's a sort of crazy guru who, through chanting and meditation, gets people to focus on themselves and be better whatever they want to be, leaders or whatever they are.
Amazing.
He was a fantastic guy.
Well, let's hope he's still here doing his good stuff.
I think he went back to the Netherlands.
Oh.
Yeah. But,
What do you think, sort of looking ahead with your crystal globe of the future? Obviously, politically things might change quite significantly in the UK. We have a general election not too far away, so it does make it quite difficult to predict. But bearing that in mind, what do you feel are the key issues that are going to shape the future of UK immigration over the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think that if we do have a change of government, and if the new government is a Labour government, which is a possibility, I think that the idea of an investor visa coming back is pretty much non-existent, because I don't think that the Labour Party would be in favour of that. I do think that the UK is going to have to think quite seriously about how it gets more investment into the UK and how it maintains its level of foreign direct investment and private investment into the UK. They have to think quite seriously about making sure that the immigration system is working to get that investment in the UK and to make it economically beneficial for the UK. So I think I struggle to see that we will be back to where we were, but I might see some different routes appearing as people realise that the existing routes aren't particularly good and are not attracting lots of great people, to see more routes opening up, which would be focused really on that sort of investment type of business, type of client. It might be as well that the UK can see the benefit of having certain people in the UK. We've been asking for many years for the UK to open up the old retirement visa. We had a great retirement visa up to 2008, which lots of people came and actually spent a lot of money here being retired, and never used the health service, had private insurance. So there's all sorts of things that could be reopened, but I think the key really is just making people feel comfortable about it, about the numbers and about who's coming in. So I'm not hugely hopeful for either this government or a future government being particularly creative, but it may be that needs will dictate the requirement for more investment in the UK and a more active review of what works and what doesn't work.
If you could wave a magic wand and have 10 minutes with Rishi Sunak to come up with a new route to attract people into the UK, the right people into the UK, what would that sort of programme look like if you were advising government and they asked you, Nick, to come up with a solution? Have you got any ideas of what that might look like?
Yeah, well, I think some sort of scheme where you passport clear winners into the UK very quickly without massive hoops and hurdles would be great. So, for example, if you've got, UKTI or TTI sitting outside of the UK who tell you this is a great founder of a business who's done incredible things, just give him a visa because he's going to come and set up more businesses here. That's what you want. You don't want to tie them up with having to invest a certain amount. You want them to be here. You want to encourage them to be in the UK. So a passporting system, to me, would be, with adequate safeguards and checks, would be great, because you can attract some great people in that way. And an investor light type of visa that does have economic benefit, so where people who are wealthy can put money to work in the UK, and actually either gift it into the UK, into philanthropic causes, which you can do currently under the Irish investor visa, and there's lots of people going to Ireland at the moment because of that visa, and just look a bit more creatively, but also have the right checks and balances in place to make sure that somebody is really rigorously checking that these people are the sort of people who can be here. Yeah,
that seems to be the gap where it failed last time. So
yeah, and just investing a bit more into the government policing this a little bit more, a bit better, and not outsourcing it, letting other people do it, and then when it goes wrong, shutting the thing down.
Yeah, sounds very sensible to me. I always like to sort of end our podcasts by asking my guests what their top tips would be for advising somebody considering a move to the UK. What would be your top tips? And don't say tax again, Nick. Let's think of something else.
I think we can assume tax is in there somewhere. But I'd say take advice early. Think about the various options you've got and be open-minded about what you might need to do in order to come to the UK, both in terms of work and business and so on. I think long-term, think about how much time you're going to spend in the UK and whether that will qualify you for permanent residence and citizenship in the long term if that's what you want. A lot of people don't think about that till too late. And yeah, those are the main tips really. Plan ahead and think about what you want to achieve at the end very carefully, and whether you can get there.
I think that's great advice. I think our advice to clients considering moving here is exactly the same. It's to take advice and plan ahead, obviously with property and engaging Blackbrick to help with the search, but also things like schools and getting in touch with a good education consultant. I think people sometimes underestimate just how long it takes to get these organised.
I agree. I totally agree. And we always say to people, think about all the things that are important to you and get them sorted before you even start to move here.
Yeah, I think it's good advice. Thank you, Nick. That brings us to the end of this month's episode of Finding Perfect Property. I want to thank my guest, Nick Rollason from Kingsley Napley, for joining us and sharing his expert insights on both the past, present and the future of UK immigration. I hope our discussion has been helpful for anyone considering a move to the UK. Please join us again soon for more expertise from across the UK real estate market. For more information about how to purchase property in prime central London, please get in touch via our website, and don't forget to like and subscribe on whichever podcast channel you use to listen. See you next time.